I'm cold. Mother, I'm cold. Mother, why can I still hear the rain? Will it stop? Chapter 6, Bridge 4. This is the point at which I was concerned the book might start to drag. At least on a second reading, that is, and if you're familiar with the book, well then you might understand why that is. We are going to be spending a lot of time with Bridge 4 in quite unpleasant circumstances, and if you're familiar with my other videos, you'll know that I sometimes have a hard time reading books about that sort of thing, but having just gone over it again, ready to record this video, I'm very pleased to say that it's actually an extremely exciting chapter. In fact, I would say it's the point at which the whole thing picks up. If you're familiar with Game of Thrones on TV, it is this chapter that you can most readily imagine appearing on TV in a show like that, directed in a way like that. It's all sort of actiony and scary and nasty and horrid. Everybody's running along and getting hurt, and it's all ooh. We're back with Kalinin here, and this chapter is one of those you just can't believe how horrible the author is being to this character kinds of chapters. Usually reserved for, abused children under the care of evil institutions, where they're being made to, walk on the machinery like at the beginning of Oliver and do painful things like that are so horrible that you actually start to feel a little bit weird about it. Horror that anyone would treat anyone this way. That they'd expect human beings to do what's being asked of these slaves. That all these army guys are able to just ride alongside of this happening and not freak out because it's normal to them. But also horror at watching the characters' bodies be physically destroyed and watching their death approaching long before it comes. The chapter begins with Ch6 the slaver selling all of the slaves off to this posh-looking Alethi noblewoman who is shocked by the condition they're all in, all starved and haggard and no good and dirty. But she spots Kalinin a mile away. She knows something's going on with him, and when she quizzes him and he starts talking about how he's, like a trained army guy and wants to be allowed to fight, he's brave enough still to stand up and say, hey, can you put me in the army please? I'm quite good with a spear, like I'm really good with a spear. She gets all tut and hoity-toity about it and goes, how dare he? I'm going to punish him. Just as he's saying this, Ch6 butts in and says, well, actually, he's a deserter and he's no good and he'll be no good for you, and he's probably already corrupted all the other slaves and put some ideas in their head about having a kind of an uprising. He's a dangerous one. I'd watch out around him. And of course, Kalinin himself has to admit that he's a murderer. Now, Ch6 told her all that stuff, not just to be horrible, but according to him, it's on his head. If, any of the slaves act up and then it gets back that that was one of the slaves that he sold to someone, then that's his job on the line. But the thing is, there's also the suggestion that he might have done it because Kalinin tore that map up, and, well, that gives a bit of context to him tearing the map up. I wasn't quite sure why that was, looking back, in the chapter that it was in. Anyway, maybe this is why. Brandon knows what he's doing, but anyway, when Kalinin says, look, I'm an army guy, put me in the fightiness, I can hold a spear really well and I can be really good and fighty, well, that's when this noblewoman starts to tut and go, no, I don't think we're going to be doing that. Gaz! And here we meet Gareth. I don't know if people called Gareth are called Gaz in America, but they are here. Gaz is the short form of Gareth. So along comes Gareth. He's a slave driver and a man of no redeeming qualities whatsoever. His face is so scarred up that his beard only grows in patches and one of his eyes is missing, but he hasn't got an eye patch on or anything, he just looks horrid. And she says, Gaz, do something special with this one. So Gaz goes, I'm a nasty man. There might be a shred of hope here, says Kalinin to himself, perhaps not realising the sarcasm with which she said do something special with him. Hello, Gaz. I'm all trained at fighting and stuff, and I'm good at fighting and that. Oh yeah, says Gaz. Yeah, you should put me in the army so that I can do fighting and stuff. Oh yeah, says Gaz, who, it turns out, isn't at all in charge of putting people in the army. He's in charge of bridge crews. You're going into Bridge 4, he says. Bridge 4 is not the number of a bridge, well it is, but particularly in this particular case, he's talking about the number of the team that crews that bridge. The fourth bridge crew. And here begins a form of torture that's just absolutely horrible to read about. These guys have to line up, and they're all emaciated, they're all completely ruined slaves, they've been given no food, they've been given no training, they're just these skinny little guys. They look like arrow fodder. Gaz actually mentions, he says something like, these are so skinny they won't even stop an arrow. Well, they have to line up underneath this, or well, around this gigantic wooden thing, and they have to hoist it up onto their shoulders, and they have to dump it down onto their shoulders. The rest have got like padding on their shoulders and feet to kind of accommodate for this, although they're still gonna pretty much like be killed by having to do just this. Kalinin, he isn't even allowed, any special clothing. He hasn't got the padding because this is the special thing that Gaz is doing with him. And they lift up this thing, they put it on their shoulders, and away they go, because it turns out that what they're carrying is a big, huge, heavy bridge. They are the bridge crews, because remember, we're on the shattered plains. Remember the shattered plains? How do you get an army across a shattered plain? Well, you need a bridge between the plains, don't you? You need a bridge between the plateaus, rather, that's what they're called. And this is the crew that has to heft those things over there, because apparently they haven't invented wheels. They can't just all stand at the back and push, or stand at the front and pull. Can't just attach them to some chulls and have them dragged along. I don't know why. No, they have to have some guys who lift them up and run along with them. Well, actually, I do know why. It's all part of the strategy, and Gaz gives Kalinin the honour of being at the front, and it feels like an honour, because it's easy and you can see, there you are running along with this thing on your back, but now you can see where you're going. He started off sort of in the middle towards the back and he couldn't see what was going on. Now he's at the front going, this is great, this is really good, what's the problem with this? Yeah, well, he's about to find out what's the problem with this. Anyway, they put the bridge down, and there's a little, I really like this book, so don't take this as too much of a criticism of it, but it took me quite a long time to actually figure out what they're doing here. When they put the bridge down, then they push it. On this first occasion, in this first chapter, actually my criticism doesn't come up, because the gap that they're pushing it across, the chasm they're pushing it across, is actually really quite narrow. It's like less than half the size, or is it half the size? It's half the size of the length of the bridge, so they just dump this thing down, and then they push it with the like rods that are sticking out the sides. Hoof! Think of the opening scene in Les Mis. Hoof! They're going hoof. They're hoofing the thing along the ground. Hoof. So you've got the two edges of the chasm. There's one of the plateaus. There's the one that they're on at the moment, which isn't a plateau. That's just like the land. And they've got this bridge, and they just oof, oof, oof. They just push it over the chasm, and because it's twice the length of the gap that it's having to go across, there's no problem. Now, what I wasn't sure about in future chapters where the gaps are longer is like, how would you do that? How would you push a bridge over a chasm without it toppling and falling into the chasm? I guess if I look over it a bit more carefully, it'll always say that the width of the chasm allows for this to be done. But later on, as I was reading the book, it just started to confuse me. See what I mean? It's not really a complaint, is it? And it seems like the nightmare is over. It seems like that's what they came here to do, and they're going to go back again. But then it turns out, no, they're not even halfway there. They have to do this another 6 times. The first time just about physically destroyed Kalinin and everyone else under the bridge. Finally, they get to the last plateau, the one that the actual army needs to be on, and that was the point of all this running in the first place. And this one is different. There's a big thing on it. Hang on. There's a large lump of something in the centre of the plateau. It looked like an enormous rock bud, perhaps some kind of chrysalis or shell, a good 20 feet tall. One side had been hacked open, exposing slimy innards, because there's army guys going biffy biffy biff. He hadn't noticed it on the initial charge. The archers had demanded all of his attention. Yeah, the archers, because here's the thing, we're not talking about the archers as in... We're talking about archers as in... Because when they got to this last plateau, there was a load of Parshendi there. He recognises them as soon as he sees them. They look a bit like Parshmen. Uh-oh, but they're really big. Those are Parshendi! These are the guys that they are fighting against. And they've got this weird... this crusty armour on. It's like sort of... it's orangey, rusty coloured, and it's a bit gross, but anyway, they've got this armour on, and there they are going, and they're stood there with crossbows aimed forwards. And here's where we realise what the point of the bridge crew is. They're not just to get the bridge to the place. You could get the bridge to the place by dragging them along behind chulls and putting wheels on them. No. Here's why. This is why they have bridge runners who run along under the bridge. Because the Parshendi realise that if they take out the bridge crew, well then the bridge isn't going to go across the chasm, and then the army isn't going to go across the chasm, and they're safe, and they can carry on hacking away at the big 20-foot tall big thing, which is what they seem to want to do here. So they shoot at the bridge crew, trying to kill them, particularly the ones at the front, which is why it's such a terrible place to be. That's why the special thing to do with Kalinin is to put him at the front, because he's just going to get an arrow straight at him straight away, and that'll be him. But the thing is, it's all strategy, because if they've used up half their arrows on the bridge crew, and the bridge crew were expendable in the first place, then when the actual army heads over there, they'll have run out of arrows, and it can just be a straight, sword fight. It's horrible, really, isn't it? It's all really horrible. But here's the thing, Kalinin just happens to survive it. And the way that it's written, and I've got to really hand this to Brandon, the way that it's written is that it is like a fight scene in Game of Thrones, if they actually filmed the fight scenes. The camera's whipping around everywhere, everybody's sort of running about, going and everything's horrible, and there's all sorts of things going on, and just in the confusion, Kalinin realises that he's survived, and the worst of it is over, and and the knights are on the way over there, and like the fighting's going on, and he's okay, he's still alive. Phew, that was a bit of luck, wasn't it? That was a bit of luck, wasn't it? And so he's still alive, and as he lies on the floor, Gaz is giving him the stink eye. He's annoyed about this. He had explicitly put him there at the front so that he would be picked off immediately, but he wasn't. So Gaz is going to be, you know, even more unpleasant to him from now on, because he's like personally has a personal vendetta against Kalinin, and hey, Kaladin's got a personal vendetta back at him. He didn't give him the pads for his shoulders and so on. He's cross. And while he's lying there, that little wind spren comes flitting down, and he makes a bit of light conversation. It's all he can really do in the circumstances, and he asks her if she's got a name. She finds out she has, and that seems to come as a bit of a surprise to her. A name, the Windspren said, her voice distant. Yes, I do have a name. She seemed surprised as she looked at Kalinin. Why do I have a name? Getting a bit weird, isn't it, this thing with the Windspren? I mean, she's supposed to be just like a little mote in the air, just a little dot of nature that isn't a person, it isn't a sentient thing, it's just an element of the fact that there's wind. But this one seems to have a name, and the name is Silfrina, or Silfrena, or Silfrena. But it doesn't matter, because we're going to be calling her Sil. And now comes the realization that after all that horror, they have to turn round and go back and do it all again in the opposite direction. But this time, with half the bridge crew missing because they've been killed. So it's going to be horrible, it's going to be horrible, it's going to be worse. And yet, despite all of this horror, it was written in such an interesting and exciting way that it really carried me along. And I mean the second time, I mean just before this video when I was reading it again to get ready. You know, I thought I was just going to be there going, yeah, it's horrible, I get it, I know all about this. But actually, no, it hooked me all over again. This is a well-written chapter, this is a good bit. Now, Kalinin survives this time, but it was a punishing chapter. Perhaps if it wasn't for the twists, which the little twists that come along throughout the chapter and just prove that this is going to be an interesting and twisty-turny read, that things will happen, that circumstances will change, like, for example, the appearance of the Parshendi with the crossbows, the surprise of what it is that the bridge crew is and has to do at all, like just the incredulity that anyone would be made to do this, the fact that Kaladin's awful life just suddenly got so much worse that we wonder how, in the last chapter or two, we ever thought that what was going on with him was even, like, bad. It's really relaxing and lovely looking back now. If it wasn't for those twists and those little hooks, I might be tempted to stop reading a different book about now, thinking like, do I really have to read about just the endless punishment of this guy for the whole thing? Is that what this is? Is that what this book is going to be? Why should I read torture porn about this guy's horrible life? But no, because just here, just in this one chapter, I've been given so many little twists that I know that this is the kind of book where little twists are going to happen, and those are they're going to get bigger as the book goes on. As we get further through it, they're going to get bigger. Something's going to happen here. Something's going to change. And I remember when I was first reading it thinking, I hope it happens pretty soon. I mean, this is a punishing chapter to read. It must be awful to write. Now, I'm not talking about bad writing, you understand. It's good writing. I know that because of how much it carried me along even the second time. But to actually do it, to sit down and write this and just punish these characters for so long, that's not... I mean, I know it might sound fun as a way to exercise your godlike power as a writer, but no, to talk about suffering and to really tap into it and talk about what that feels like, there's a form of suffering in itself, albeit an extremely first world probably one, but it is just sort of dwelling on that kind of topic. Must be hard work as a writer, so he's not going to want to do this for many more chapters. Surely, I was thinking to myself, surely, but I had no idea what world of pain I was in for. But don't worry, it's exactly as I've said. Even though he keeps you there in this place of like, oh no, what a bad situation, it's always interesting, it's always twisty-turny, and whenever it gets too harsh, it always switches to another character so that you can enjoy a lovely city of bells again, or something like that. We get to go back to the little marbles with the jewels in. Look, I've put my marbles in little pots since I made that video. Look. Woo! Marbles! Marbles! Aren't they lovely, marbles? Keeping them around as a permanent fixture on my bookshelf. There's a particularly dark moment at the end of the chapter where the guy who was bridge running next to Kalinin and who kind of talked him through the process and sort of like, you know, inducted him into it, you know, in a quiet, whispered sort of way because Gaz was yelling at them all to just get on with it. That guy gets killed and Kalinin has to steal his clothes because Kalinin is not allowed his own set of clothes, so he has to just steal some. And that, I guess, is Kaladin's first sort of moment where he really is a bridge man, where he really kind of succumbs to the lifestyle he's been put into. And as usual, we are introduced covertly to a few interesting bits and bobs about the general world of this story, and I've noted them down. We have a new kind of spren, anticipation spren. Bit of a mouthful, bit of a long word. Red streamers that grow from the ground and whip about in the wind. We learn about Dalinar. Kaladin's heard of Dalinar. He is a high prince, the king's uncle, thought to be the best of men, a man who has never broken his word. Kalinin doubts that. Much the same had been said about Amaram. What's going on? What happened with Amarin? We do not know. And yet, in this chapter, there's more talk about the fact that, you know, something went on and it had something to do with Amarin and he murdered someone. We don't know how. Kalinin says, oh, I was drunk and things got heated and I killed someone, but then the next thing that happens in the text is he goes, that was a lie, that's not what happened, but, you know, it's the best he's got. There's a moment here that I didn't notice the first time round that might be a clue towards what's going on with this Windspren Sill. After they've put the bridge down and everybody's tromping over it, Kalinin is lolling around in pain and sort of rubbing his muscles because he knows that that's his best chance, because of his medical training that he seems to have. He knows that that's his best chance at not cramping up on for the return journey. Soldiers crossed the bridge 4 across, spears held high, shields forward. Gaz watched them with obvious envy, and Kaladin's Windspren danced around the man's head. Despite his fatigue, Kalinin felt a moment of jealousy. Why was she bothering that blowhard instead of Kalinin? So there's Gaz, who secretly, you know, would love to be one of the army guys going off to battle instead of having to run all these bridges. And at that moment, Sill goes and flits round his head, and it seems to be the only, you know, that the text seems to imply that the only connecting tissue there is the fact that Gaz is looking on with sort of envy or whatever. The woman that Tavlak sold the slaves to is called Hashel, Brightness Hashel. She's the one who told Gaz to do something special with Kalinin. We'll be seeing Hashel again later, and that is actually more or less it for this chapter. So hopefully this has been a slightly shorter video and we can carry on in that vein, because I don't want these to all be super long, but then that's what I always say about all my videos. Have you seen any of my Torment Let's Plays? I always think they're going to be about half an hour long. They're always an hour long. I do not know how people do videos that are like 5 minutes long. Flipping heck. Flipping heck. So that's us for now. Next video and next chapter we're going back to see Shallan again in chapter 7, Anything Reasonable. So I'll see you later for that and so on. Bye! www.youtube.com/